Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. So, it's been a while now since the Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass was finished, and honestly, it's still hard to believe it. I still remember the days when we were predicting what the next wave would have. Good times. But alas, all good things must come to an end, sooner or later, and that includes the Booster Course Pass. And no, we're not getting a second one. In retrospect, it definitely could have been way better. The visuals were mostly subpar, a lot of the remakes had bad decisions, but worst of all, no Piranha Plant pipeline. But I digress. On the whole, it was an incredibly fun experience, even if the base game was definitely more impressive. So, you know what? Let's finally take on the daunting task to rank every single one of the 48 Booster Course Pass tracks.
Aren't you a bit late to the party, Albert? I mean, it's been almost 3 months now.
Truthfully, this video was actually gonna come out much earlier as a New Year's Eve special, but that didn't quite happen. However, while the best time may have been 2 months ago, the next best time is now. See it as a 7,000 subscriber special instead. I'll be dividing this video up into 5 separate sections, a bit like a tier list in a nutshell. And obviously, we'll be starting off with the D tier, which is for courses that I don't personally like. So you know what? With all that being said, let's get started with the ranking.
He doesn't like Moonview Highway.
Dude, spoiler alert. In last place, we unsurprisingly have 3DS Toad Circuit. To be honest, there wasn't really much of a question about this. Between all of the game's tracks, this is easily the most unimpressive one. It's not bad, and as a starting course, it does the job fine. The Toad balloons add some personality, there's quite a few shortcuts, and the music is pretty nice. But there's only so much you can do with it, and the visuals. What in the world happened here? Yeah, this wasn't much of a contest. It's just a kind of generic track. And not much better is SNES Mario Circuit 3, another kind of basic circuit course. It was probably the most disappointing track overall this return, partly because even from the SNES there were more interesting Mario circuits. The layout is fine and there are quite a lot of places to cut corners. The problem is that that's all there is to it. But hey, at least the music and visuals are kinda charming. But yeah, this is just another basic course without much going on. Next up, we have Tokyo Blur, our first city track on the list. More like Tokyo Circuit. Now, the city tracks are actually my favorite part of the Booster Course Pass. Not only do I like the concept of racing through real-life cities, but I always especially loved how each lap took you on a different path. That said, this is not one of the interesting ones. It's just so unbelievably basic, from the setting to the music, even the layout is painfully simple. The best thing I can say about it is the glider at the end. Thankfully, it's a pretty short map, and at least the different laps add some variety, but yeah, Tokyo deserved a much better city track. Luckily though, those were the only 3 courses to unfortunately land in the D tier. Next up, we move on to the C tier, which will include any course that I think is at least okay or average, like I wouldn't mind playing them if I had to. Opening up this tier, we have GBA Sky Garden. If this was a ranking of how ruined these remakes were, Sky Garden would no doubt take the bottom spot. For starters, the layout has been so oversimplified that it can hardly even be considered the same track anymore. This isn't just a Sky Garden problem. Most of the GBA remakes in Mario Kart Tour, and by extension the Booster Course Pass, got incredibly simplified, although Sky Garden was probably the biggest offender of this. However, a terrible remake doesn't mean a terrible track. I still find this course to be pretty enjoyable, because while it's incredibly short and easy, it's also got a pretty epic atmosphere, with a new remix and a glider at the end, so at least it's fun while it lasts. Sunset Wilds was another GBA remake that suffered a lot of setbacks. I still remember the original track in Super Circuit. The sun going down, the Shy Guys latching onto you, it was all a unique experience. Now it's just Mario Circuit 3 in a desert. I mean, it still has most of the features, but it's all been so simplified to a point that it might as well just be any other track. Especially since they took out the core gimmick of the track, that being the sun going down. That said, just like with Sky Garden though, I still think it's an alright track by itself. The remix is actually one of my favorites overall from the DLC, and I think it's kind of funny how you can drift between the mud and off-road in some sections. But yeah, on the whole, it's a kind of basic track that makes me sad inside. Next up is our first non-city nitro from Tor, Sky High Someday, and to be honest, I'm just gonna say it right now, but this map is really underrated. Sure, it's kinda janky, but honestly, that's why it's so fun in my opinion. The floaty physics, the bright setting, as well as all the trickable areas and hidden paths. Okay, it's weird that you can clip through the railings, but I don't know, there's a weird charm to it. However, it's still a pretty average course, because in the end, it's also just a giant oval. An incredibly packed oval, sure, but there's only so much you can do when there's a total of 2 turns. Maybe you should have put a little more effort into your first new track, Nintendo, but yeah, it's still a bit fun. After that is our next city track on the list, New York Minute. To be honest, the best way I can put this track is that it's Tokyo Blur but done right. Because while this one is also pretty simple, it also has more unique areas to make it stand out, rather than just a boring highway. And you can't go wrong with the night feeling, it's just so pretty. Same for the next course on the list, Boo Lake. Now, unlike the other 2 GBA remakes we just talked about, this one didn't really get ruined. Well, besides for the first 2 jumps at the start. Otherwise, it got a shockingly impressive glow up, and not just through the added lake, but also because of how much crazier it feels now with the tilted anti-gravity section. Perhaps a bit too crazy though. Like, the music starts off pretty haunting, but then it just evolves into loud noises, and the map is pretty short so it doesn't leave much of an impression. But at least it's short and sweet. Another Super Circuit remake that got buffed was Riverside Park. Like Boo Lake, it's also pretty short, but I liked it a bit better. Partly because there's more shortcut potential, partly because the jungle theming is more charming, but most importantly because of these adorable guys, the Tuis. I mean, sure, they mostly just walk around, but they still provide some challenge and charm to the map. Sadly, charm alone couldn't save the next map on the list, Merry Mountain. I remember first hearing about it in Mario Kart Tour and thinking it looked so good, and well, to an extent, I guess it's kinda true. To this day, it's probably one of my favorite atmospheres ever in a Mario Kart track. The epic Christmas music, the stunning night, really? There's nothing wrong about it. But then you get to the layout and... yeah. I mean, the first part is fine, being able to drive on these train tracks, but then you have these useless half-pipes and this long stretch down of just... nothing. Sure, a glider opens up on lap 2, but you still have to get through this boring straightaway first. All in all, it's a pretty wasted map. Still incredibly epic and beautiful, but man, it could have been so much more than this. The same can be said for the next course on the list, and this might be a bit of a controversial choice, but Singapore Speedway. Alright, so the only city tracks I think are truly forgettable are Tokyo and New York Minute. Everything else has at least something incredibly cool to make it stand out. And for this one, it's definitely got to be the atmosphere. My goodness, does it feel crazy. Especially with the stunning night. Sadly, it doesn't really hold up when it's all show and no substance. Both of the first 2 laps are incredibly short and don't really have a lot going on for them. Luckily, it does start to pick up the pace with lap 3, but as unique as it is, at that point it's kinda late to make the track much better, and the fact that it's twice as long as the other 2 makes it kinda jarring. And it's sad because the route could have been so much better. Maybe add Goombas to Chinatown, don't make the rooftops just a straight line. Maybe give lap 2 more than just this tiny section. But yeah, I still like it, but it's not a track that really leaves me satisfied. And lastly, before we cap off the C tier, let's talk about another perhaps controversial choice. And here begins the onslaught of Mario Kart Wii tracks. I remember when it was data mined it would be getting 1 Wii course per wave, which already seemed like a pretty big amount compared to other games, but then we ended up getting another 2 as well, and even as someone who grew up with this game, I think it's too... much. And for me, the weakest one is Moonview Highway. Yeah, honestly, this one kinda fell off since I first played it. Part of what made this track so fun in the original was just how crazy the traffic could get, in spite of the simple layout. The cars were so fast and would even change lanes at times. Sadly, in this game, the cars are pretty slow and few, making for a much less special track. That said, at least the remix is an absolute banger. I'm still surprised by how much more catchy it is compared to the Wii version. But yeah, overall that rounds up the C tier of my ranking. Next, we move on to the B tier. This is where the tracks start to get actually kind of good. Not amazing per se, but on the whole, I usually have a really fun time on them. Starting off with Rome Avanti. This is a pretty alright city track. I don't actually have any direct issues with it, and where it does shine, it's actually kinda impressive. Each section has at least something cool, whether you're circling the Colosseum, colliding with other players, or bouncing off rocky wrenches. It gets especially chaotic towards the final lap with the chain jump hit, and I really dig the dark and broody atmosphere. That said, the course still feels kind of basic. You're mostly just driving through streets, and while they definitely did their best with what they had, I just think other courses have more interesting themes. Next up, we have DS Mario Circuit. This one always makes me giddy thinking about. Everyone thought we'd get Delfino Square or Airship Fortress, and then we get this as the final DS course instead. Truly one of the greatest subversions of all time.
Nah, you're just saying that because you predicted it.
Whatever. That aside, it's still a fun course. Among the Mario circuits in the series, this is easily one of the hardest ones. The turns are tighter than usual, and the fire projectiles from the piranha plants can be surprisingly difficult to avoid. The remake in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe also turned one of the sections into a forest, with a Wiggler roaming around on lap 3. On the whole, it's just a really solid circuit course, and sure, while I'm kinda sad that we can't go through the castle, it was always really fun anyways, so it's not too much of a loss. And next up is another curveball track, Daisy's Circuit from Mario Kart Wii. Man, there sure are a lot of circuits in this DLC. This is easily my favorite one though, partly because it doesn't actually feel like a circuit at all. Instead, it takes place in a harbor town during a stunning sunset, which honestly is just one of the most charming themes ever for me. Even if I wish the sunset was more orange. But yeah, this track deserved a better name. The circuit label gives it a completely false impression, and I think it would be better off called something like Daisy Sanctum instead. But yeah, it's a very pleasant track. It's simple, but the sidewalks, stair cut, all of it makes for a soothing promenade. After that, at number 33, we have GCN DK Mountain. To be honest, this might come off as shockingly high because I actually have a lot of problems with it. The half pipes are useless, the visuals are lacking outside the mountain, and the turns are just a bit too tight. Like, this is the only course in 150cc where I regularly find myself having to brake drift, and that should not have to happen. The Double Dash and Wii versions just kinda felt better to play, partly because of their controls. That said, you also just can't go wrong with the concept. I always loved the idea of being shot up a mountain and then having to make your way down, and it's still generally exciting, and the gap cut is pretty fun, I suppose. That said, let's talk about the glow up instead now. At number 32, we have Snowland, the best GBA remake in the past. I still remember being absolutely shocked to see its return, and I couldn't have been any less excited. The theming is already beautiful as it is, with one of the most jolly tunes in the game, but then we get not one, not two, but 3 amazing shortcuts. Okay, maybe not the first one, but the gap cut is just something else. It's easy enough to pull off, and the reward is so fulfilling. Still, it's yet again a pretty simple track at its core, and it wouldn't really be fair to put it any higher. Same with SNES Bowser Castle 3. Now this banger had no right being as great as it is, and when I first played it, I was actually incredibly close to putting it in S tier. To this day, I'm surprised by just how much effort went into it, especially after the travesty that was Mario Circuit 3. But well, they nailed it and went all out. I love driving on top of the walls, I love the new remix, all of it is so fun. Like Snowland, the only thing that's keeping it down here is that it's still a kind of simple track, layout-wise. But man, I never would have expected to be satisfied with a SNES track as the penultimate course of the pass. At number 30 though, we have Wii Coconut Mall. Oh man, this track, I can't hate it enough. For the longest time, this was actually one of my least favorite courses from the DLC. And to be honest, I still hate the changes made to it. Everything just looks so cartoony now, the colors are too strong, and even with the donut spin, the cars are a shell of their former selves. But with that considered, it's still Coconut Mall, only one of the most unique concepts ever for a Mario Kart track. You simply can't not have fun with it. And as long as the layout is still intact, it's still a pretty good course. And we're not done with lovable monstrosities, because at number 29, we have 3DS Alpine Pass.
3DS Rock Mountain!
Not this debate again. You will never make me call it by that name.
Dude, it's a mountain, and it has rocks.
Oh yeah, but it's also an Alpine Pass. A pretty ugly one, sadly. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, Nintendo just did not know how to texture grass and cliffs for this pass, and it's especially noticeable here. Like, what happened? I don't want these ugly yellow cliffs. It definitely takes a lot away from the original atmosphere, but in the end, gameplay is still what matters most, and it's still loads of fun to soar through the woods and avoid the boulders, even if the gliding physics were more fluid in Mario Kart 7. Coming up at number 28, we have Paris Promenade, the first course in the entire Booster Course pass, and honestly, I don't think they could have picked a more fitting first impression. It's already easygoing and pleasant as it is, but it also introduces the arrow gimmick so seamlessly, having the first 2 laps be the same, and then taking you by complete shock when the final lap has you going backwards. And it works really well, especially with all the available split paths to take. I wasn't really all that hyped for the Booster Course Pass when it was first announced, but as soon as I finished a race on this track, I knew I was in for a good time and couldn't wait to see how other courses would handle this gimmick. In 27th place, we have DS Waluigi Pinball. So, this track. This is actually a track I didn't really like at all originally. Like sure, the concept of racing inside a pinball machine is cool and all, but you barely actually spend time on the actual table. Instead, you were mostly just driving on this boring long road. Luckily, I ended up really enjoying this version. The colors really pop out, and they really help the track feel more crazy. Even so, I'm also a bit disappointed that they removed a lot of the unique sound effects. Like, why? And the remix doesn't really fit too well, since it was originally made with Wario Stadium in mind, but it's not a major issue. In the end, it's a banger of a track, even if I find it kinda overhyped. As far as bangers go, I'd rather play Berlin Byways. Man, I still remember when it was first released and it was widely considered to be one of the best city tracks. Now it's getting no traction at all. But like, this is the only Tour City track with actual traffic, and for that alone, it deserves at least some respect. The theming is definitely boring. You're mostly just driving on a generic highway. In fact, that's pretty much the entirety of lap 2. But also, the track just has such a positive feel to it. The music is arguably one of the catchiest tunes in the entire game, and for everything that's kinda dull, you've also got a decent flow, a subway station, and even the literal Berlin Wall with Wumps, which also has a crazy shortcut. Yeah, this track really shines where it does. That said, I do wish it was night themed. It would have made the theming stand out more, and that way it would actually make sense to be in the Moon Cup. Yeah, maybe Vancouver Velocity should have taken its place instead in that case. Yeah, good old Vancouver. How do you go from being the fan favorite city track to being an example of how to not port over a city track? Seriously, there were so many weird decisions with this track. The theming and all is, once again, absolutely amazing. Lap 1 starts off strong, with the numerous suspension bridges and big glider. It's on its way to become one of the most epic city tracks ever, but then the next 2 laps are just kinda boring. Especially lap 3, and the fact that they're almost completely different in tone from the first lap just makes it so jarring. Still though, the good stuff is really good. So for me at least, it kinda balances out for a good track. But man did Nintendo embarrass themselves. Like, why couldn't lap 1 be the final lap instead? But it's whatever, nothing I can do. And with that, we've officially approached the halfway point of the ranking, clocking in at around 18 minutes apparently. Well, this is certainly gonna be a long video. Yeah, let's take a squeaky clean break for a while, and we'll be back shortly. Alright, we're back. Let's get back to just a few. Wait, who broke the screen?
This is your punishment for not calling it Rock Mountain.
Ow. Wow. I swear, man, now to fix this right. Now that that's out of the way though, let's open up the top half of the list with the cult classic Wheat DK's Snowboard Cross.
It's DK Summit!
Oh, shut up, Bertel. But yeah, this course is iconic. The best way I can put it is that it's a better version of DK Mountain in every way. You still get shot up a mountain and then have to make your way back, but the layout is just so much more engaging, with more interesting hazards and a cooler theme, literally. It's just a really epic track, even if the physics of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe kinda ruin it. I mean, geez, in Mario Kart Wii the jumps were way more dramatic. And the jankiness gets a bit too much at times, but whatever, it's still a really enjoyable track. Number 23, we have another city track. This time, Los Angeles laps. 7.5 out of 10, not enough oil field. No doubt, this is arguably the largest city track of the bunch, and for that, it's always stood out to me. Unlike in the other city courses, there are pretty much no overlapping areas at all between laps. Each one takes place in a completely different location, and they're all pretty fun to drive through, whether it's the Santa Monica Beach, Dodger Stadium, Beverly Hills, or most iconic, this random oil field on lap 3. Yeah, it's still kinda weird they thought something like this was a worthy representation, but you know, I don't mind since it reminds me of Toad's Factory a bit and has all these neat split paths. In the end, it's overall a varied and fun city track, and unlike the previous ones I talked about, at least all laps are pretty fun this time. But I do have to ask, why couldn't we keep the sunset from the tour version? Not a major issue, but it did make the track feel more unique. Next up is a bit of a peculiar course. Introducing Deep Moray Trench.
It's Piranha Plant
Cope. To be honest, I feel like this is probably the most overlooked track in DLC, even among the other non-city tour nitros. Like, you've got the 2 hated ones, as well as the 3 loved ones. But this one, well, at least it's more remembered than Pipeline. We will miss you. But yeah, this track has an enormously special place in my heart. The theming is just so cool. I love racing through sunken ruins, and the fact that it plays like a city track with multiple routes makes it all the more charming. And that's where my obligatory nitpick comes in. Laps 2 and 3 are so chaotic, but then you have lap 1, which is just a long oval. If not for it, this would have been far higher. And lastly, capping off the B tier, we have GCN Waluigi Stadium, by far one of the most impressive remakes in the past. I remember being disappointed when it was first delayed from Wave 3, but when it finally came, I understood why. Seriously, this was the first time I thought the course actually looked better than the base game, like these piranha plants actually kinda scared me. And the gameplay is still as epic as ever. I love these new extra paths hovering above and how you actually have to use the half pipes to even get up on them. It's such a neat feature. I was a bit sad that they removed the sunset, but honestly, I think the night theming suits the chaos of this remake much more. Sadly, the straightaway is also much easier now, and they unforgivably removed the dancing signs. But otherwise, this is definitely one of the most impressive remakes in the past. And that concludes the B tier. A lot of the maps definitely had issues, but on the whole, the good tremendously outweighed the bad for sure. Now we head on to the A tier, and this is where the tracks really start to get kind of good. Opening up the top 20, we have Amsterdam Drift. Oh, this track just makes me so happy inside. I think most people can agree that this was when the city track started to get kind of creative, and they sure couldn't have picked a better first track for 2023. The whole course just has a really optimistic and euphoric vibe to it, and each lap is incredibly different from the other, often not even taking place in the city itself. Perhaps a bit too different though, and my goodness are the turns kind of tight at times. Sure, on one hand, you could say it's a bit of a disjointed mess, but I like to call it organized turmoil. It may be a huge mess, but it's some of the most fun chaos I've ever had on a track. Especially the final lap. My goodness does it get all over the place. In 19th place, we have N64 Choco Mountain. This is another track that always held a bit of a special place in my heart, because back when Wave 1 first released, this was the only retro track to actually feel like a remake, and not just in terms of the visuals. It was already a charming track in the original version, racing through a chocolate mountain, and this version also added a new cave and glider, making an already unique track even more interesting. Not much to complain about at all, really. And next up is the other N64 track in the past, Calamari Desert. Originally, this track had only one point of interest, the train that would block the players from time to time. Otherwise, it was just a dead loop around some desert. But well, this version completely redeems it by having you drive on the train tracks for the final 2 laps. I wasn't shocked by this decision, considering Mario Kart Tour had a variant like it, but oh man, it gives the track a whole new identity, and I love that. It's still a kind of simple layout, but man, they really knocked it out of the park with this one gimmick. We may have only gotten 2 N64 remasters in the DLC, but man, are they both some of the most interesting ones. A bit less so with DS Shroom Ridge. I'm sorry, how do you go from this, which is already pretty limited, to this? Like, this isn't even necessarily ugly, it just looks so unfinished. But you know what? Just like with Alpine Pass and Coconut Mall, I just can't really bring myself to hate this track. I always loved the soothing road trip vibes of this map, and while it doesn't feel as alive anymore, it's also still just as fun to twist around the turns, and the added shortcuts are nice additions to an otherwise straightforward track. Really, if it had the looks as well, this would have easily been higher. At number 16, we have Tour London Loop. This would probably be way lower for most people, and while on one hand I can kinda see why, this is another track that has a special place in my heart. On the surface, it seems like a pretty average city track, no major standouts or anything, or well besides the rocking music. But it also has quite possibly the best route out of any city track. Both of the first 2 laps aren't amazing, but they got enough things going on to leave an impression, mostly with the chain jumps. But then lap 3 decides to take the best of both, add in some new roads and release the chain jumps from their captivity. 2 words, absolutely kingly. I love that they did something so dynamic. And it shockingly makes for one of the most epic city courses ever for me. And it's only toppled by one of my favorite songs in the Boosted Course Pass. So yeah, opening up the top 15, we have Wee Mushroom Gorge. Easily one of the most addicting tracks in the game. It was fun enough in Mario Kart Wii. Not the best thing ever, but I always had fun bouncing off of the mushrooms. Shockingly, it's also the only Wii track to have successively gotten better with each new release, in my opinion. Take notes, Coconut Mall. This remake kind of takes the best aspects of both of the previous versions, including the glider shroom in Mario Kart 7, as well as the 2 shortcuts from Mario Kart Wii. Even the huge gap cut. I did not expect that when I first heard about it. But I'm so happy because there's so much you can do now. It's just the Play-Doh visuals holding it back. Following that, we have Wee Maple Treeway. To be honest, not a whole lot to say about this one. It's just a really charming and soothing track where you're racing on twisted tree branches. I love the unique autumn theming and the atmosphere is incredibly relaxing. Not much to complain about. Or well, I'm still sad I didn't keep in the Jackbox bridge, but I'll take the half pipes as compensation. Overall, it's just a fun and difficult track, and I've always had a lot of fun on this little gem. And after that, we have Tor Sydney Sprint. Now this one certainly took people by storm. Even though Wave 4 was when the city started to get more ambitious, I still to this day see Sydney Sprint being one of the big fan favorites, and honestly, I wouldn't entirely disagree. After all, I have it as my 4th favorite city. It's not even that ambitious, but when Wave 2 released, there wasn't really much to compete with. And even now, it has one of the most epic feels for a city track with the banger music and tropical atmosphere. Just like with London, the route they picked is just perfect. Lap 1 is pretty average, but then lap 2 takes you through this twisty park before it takes you backwards, and eventually caps off with the final lap being a reverse on the first. It's a great way to finish where you started, and combined with the vibes, it makes for an incredibly fun journey. Even with it being the only city track without any hazards. Even New York had some Goombas. Daisy Cruiser, another tropical track, takes 12th place on my list. This was always one of my favorite Mario Kart Double Dash courses, and it still holds up well in this game. In fact, this is probably the single most harmless retro track in the entire DLC. I mean, sure you can now drive in the pool and the cellar is flooded, but they were expected changes, and now there's even Goombas chilling there. You're still paving through a relaxing cruiser, and well, for me, I've always loved cruise ships, so naturally I'd have a soft spot for it. Honestly, it just has so many neat things. On the whole, it's just a really relaxing and creative track, without any major issues. And next up, barely missing out on the top 10, we have 3DS Rainbow Road. Sadly, the lesser of the 2 Rainbow Roads in this pass. It's not particularly difficult, the road is a bit too blue, and the remix is honestly kinda disappointing. Seriously, why did they make the music so bombastic? But I digress, it's still a shockingly amazing ride. You simply can't ruin what is arguably the most ambitious Rainbow Road to date. It was the first one ever to be divided up into sections rather than 3 laps, and you're not just driving on rainbows, you also have sections on Saturn's rings and the moon. And on one hand, it's a bit of an easy track, and the first section is just kinda there, but it's no doubt an amazing journey. Just one question though. What on earth is this mushroom standing on? And this is it! We're in the final top 10 stretch now. I hope you've all enjoyed the journey so far. Hopefully, no one has fallen asleep just yet.
What?
Opening up the top 10, we have
Koopas!
Cape. Now this is a course I did not think I'd enjoy in this game at all, and it's not even like this version fixed any of the issues I was worried about to begin with. The cliffs are super ugly yellow, the Koopa signs are gone, and the pipe is still underwater and without the electrical spinners. How do you manage to remove everything that made a course so special and still keep it almost just as fun? Well, I did exaggerate a bit, so that could be why. After all, you're still speeding through running water and tight corners, and it's just as much of a rush as before. And while the pipe isn't as fun as it was in Wii, I like the current take too. In some ways, I actually think it flows a bit better with the track, since you're incentivized to take all of the speed boosts. And while I still don't like the color scheme, at least it's textured. So overall, while it's not a particularly great remake, it's somehow still one of the most fun courses in the game. In 9th place is Athens Dash, by far the most epic city track. Or well, at least until Madrid arrived. But man, this city track is unique. Perhaps a bit too unique actually. Unlike the other cities where you're driving on streets, this one exclusively takes place on the Acropolis, taking you through ruins and hills. So for that reason, it's definitely made a place in people's hearts, including mine to an extent. However, maybe it's just me, but I wish it took place more in the urban areas as well. While it may be different from other city tracks, it's not really unique within itself, since you're mostly just driving through the same environment all 3 laps. Lap 3 does have one town-ish area, but it's not really enough. And in the end, it does feel a bit underwhelming, especially since they took out the cannon and swamps from the tour version. But I digress, it's still one of the most fun courses ever to mess around on. And that music, it's probably my favorite from the entire Boosted Course Pass. And lastly, before we move on to the final tier, let's round up with Bangkok Rush. And here's another remake where they took out pretty much everything. No more inky piranha plants, no tuk-tuks, no bouncing on boats. Even the skybox is much less dazzling. With the other remakes, you could at least blame Mario Kart Tour for ruining them first, whereas this one was loved because of the Tour version. But yet despite these shortcomings, I still can't get enough of it. It may be lacking in most details, but even so, I still feel that it's one of the most unique city tracks in the game. I love how unique the sections are, and especially how much of a focus there is on split paths. They may have taken out a lot of the charm, but the core identity is still there for me, and that's what matters the most. And with that, we say goodbye to the A tier and move on to the S tier. These are the tracks that I pretty much don't have any issues with at all. They're some of the most fun courses I've ever had the joy of playing through and simply can't ever get enough of. Starting off in 7th place with Yoshi's Island. Now this is how you make a crossover track. The original Wii U DLC had a fair share of crossover tracks as well, but none of them really handled it as well as this one. It's so unbelievably charming. From the unique enemies, the athletic remix, even the cartoony art style fits it. I love how they managed to mesh like 7 different areas from the game, and yet nothing feels out of place. There's even a bunch of smaller things that make the track for me, like the exclusive Yoshi coins, the world completion theme playing up on finishing a race, and of course best of all, the question mark block that generates a shortcut. It's all just an amazing love letter to the Yoshi's Island game. At worst, I guess some of the areas feel a bit empty, but honestly, it hardly even matters. What an amazing track. In 6th place, we have 3DS Rosalina's Ice World. This is a course that took almost everyone by surprise when it was revealed for Wave 6, and honestly, I don't think I could have asked for a better curveball track. Like sure, it's a shame that the Piranha Plant pipeline got shafted, but as a course, this was arguably even better. The Mario Galaxy theming is on point with this one. I love all the references to it, I love how unique the desolate atmosphere feels, and the remix is so hauntingly beautiful. Not to mention, it has arguably the most fun half-pipe section in the game. Like, this is the kind of jank I want. And the layout has a fair share of split paths as well. Really, there's not much to complain about, except perhaps the visuals. Opening up the top 5, we have Squeaky Clean Sprints. By far the most original track in the entire pass. You're racing inside of a giant bathroom, completed with everything you'd expect. It's all filled to the brim with detail, and it was actually on track to possibly become my favorite course of all time. You've got a bathtub with trickable bath bombs, this slippery floor with soap, and so many split paths. What's there not to love? I'll tell you what. Drain section. Visually boring and does not play particularly well in a Deluxe, with how narrow it is. You were this close to first place, but then you just had to add this. Okay, it's not that bad, but man, they could have done more of it, perhaps make it an anti-gravity. Still, this is one of the coolest track concepts ever, and I always loved playing on it. At number 4, we have DS Peach Gardens. Now, I remember when I put it as my favorite Wave 3 track and was worried it was just recency bias, but no, this course is still going strong for me. It was already an incredibly charming course in Mario Kart DS, with the calm, yet exciting vibes. The chain jumps lurking behind the bushes always made for an exhilarating ride, and on one hand, while this remake is a bit easier, it all becomes irrelevant when lap 3 suddenly has you going backwards. Just what? I absolutely love it, and the fact that it wasn't even showcased in the trailers made the surprise only that much more mind-blowing. Just what a kingly remake. Opening up the top 3, we have the best city track, Madrid. All these big cities, and yet the winner is the one I had the absolute lowest expectations on. Prior to Mario Kart, I didn't really have much knowledge about Madrid, and judging by photos, I wasn't really sure it could end up becoming a compelling city track. But oh man, could I not have been any more wrong. Against all odds, it's probably the most varied and original city track to date, and they couldn't have picked a better one to start the Spinning Cup. There's so many unique areas to it, from the Wiggler Plaza, train station, museum, swamp market, geyser pond, and best of course, the football stadium at the end. All of it is amazing, only toppled by the 3 epic music themes. Sure, some areas could be bigger, I mean the train station is just a simple U-turn, but this is already more than I could ask for most city tracks. Honestly, the fact that this track isn't more loved actually kinda shocked me. It's genuinely one of my top 20 courses of all time now, and I wonder how unique the city tracks could have been if they continued past this one. But yeah. In second place, we have Wii Rainbow Road. In my opinion, easily the better Rainbow Road in this pass. 3DS Rainbow Road may have been a good finale for the first half of the DLC, but I think we can all admit that when it came for the whole pass, they couldn't have picked a more satisfying finale. It's one of the longest and most difficult Mario Kart tracks to date, with a full lap taking almost an entire minute to complete. And oh man, is that minute some of the most beautiful chaos you could imagine, with so many difficult sections. 3DS Rainbow Road may have been an adventure, sure, but a lot of the sections were also just kind of easy and forgettable, especially the first lap. For Wii Rainbow Road, every section has a purpose, and it makes for a perfect final impression. However, it's not my absolute favorite track. Partly because, well, I guess it gets a bit long at times, especially during online, but you know what, whatever. Still, the best course in the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass is and will probably always be Ninja Hideaway for me. You know, it's kinda funny how, even though Wave 1 is the worst one by a long shot, it still, after all this time, also has the best track by a long shot. But honestly, this course is just that kingly. It's honestly some of the closest we've ever come to perfection in a Mario Kart track. The map design is just so chaotic, with so many different gadgets to avoid, so many shortcuts, and so many split paths. In fact, for pretty much the whole race, you have a lower and a higher level, and you can often even alternate between the ones. You simply never get bored. And as a cherry on top, the theming is pretty amazing too. Not as unique as Yoshi's Island or Squeaky Clean Sprint perhaps, but nevertheless, I love the idea of exploring a ninja temple in the spring night. And my goodness, does the music get banging. And that was my ranking of the 48 tracks in the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. Overall, it was definitely a fun time while it lasted. While most of these courses could definitely be way better, both in visuals and gameplay, in the end, it was still an incredibly fulfilling experience.
Nah, you're giving it way more credit than it deserves.
Of course it's you.
Seriously, Nintendo can do so much better. We signed with the base game.
I mean, yeah, true, but that's not really relevant to this video. Why don't you share what tracks you liked instead?
Only a single course. That's Piranha Plant Pipeline.
But that's not even in the game.
Exactly.
But yeah, that was it for this video. But what is your ranking of the Booster Course Pass? Did you agree with me or not? If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, share and subscribe to my channel, as I talked about everything Mario related. Follow me on Discord, Twitter and Patreon, and I'll see you all soon. Until next time.